Recently, I made a video about the role of women in the past, and before I started rambling at the camera, I had a really strong, cogent idea of this central line of argument that I was going to put to you. And in my rambling, I got sidetracked so many times that I got to the end of the speech, rounded up, and then after I'd stopped the camera, thought, oh, wait a minute, I didn't actually mention the main thing that I was going to mention, so hence this video. Whoops. I was going to talk about inward-looking power and outward-looking power, and how the inward power is feminine in nature and the outward-looking power is masculine in nature. Please don't infer from my words that I say that one of these things is good and one is bad, or one better or one worse, or that things inevitably have to be this way or should be this way, but generally in the past they were this way. And you know, I'm not trying to be at all judgmental. Now, imagine some large unit of people, a nation perhaps, a tribe, or there's a very good ancient Greek word, oikios. There's no exact modern equivalent of it. You've got to imagine it's a mixture of a company, a household, and a family. These three things roll into one. So people within an oikios were often related, but not all related. Some would be related through marriage, and some just wouldn't be related at all. So there'd be some allied families perhaps within an oikios, and they're not all necessarily living in one building. It could be several buildings in this household, this oikios. But within the oikios, which is the sort of economic unit, if you like, of the ancient Greek world, people would be allotted tasks which they did for their own oikios. So if you were, for instance, the oikios's potter, you would make pottery. You would probably do several other things as well, but one of the things that you did, because you were quite good at it, was make the pottery. So you would make the pottery for your oik. We need more of this kind of pot. Okay, you'd make a few of those, there you go, and in return you'd get something else. But when it came to trading with some other oikios, then things were different, because that oikios over there is a different economic unit. So when they need more pots than they can produce at the moment, then trade has to happen. They have to pay us, you see, and that trade, they would be negotiating with men, usually. And if there were dispute, particularly if there were dispute, so that oikios is annoyed with this oikios, and perhaps the men here decide, right, we're going to have it out with those guys over there, and if they don't agree to give us all those pots that they said they would give us, we're going to go to the heralds and demand arbitration. And the heralds will be male, and the trial will be conducted with men representing these two sides, equal in dignity to each other. So the oikios was this unit, and it acted a bit like a nation, if you like. It traded with other nations, but made its own stuff within itself. Now, that was a man's world looking outwards, but within the oikios, within the tribe, within the nation and so forth, within the household looking inwards, that sort of power was generally in the hands of women, not men. So when there was a war and you needed generals, you needed armies and that sort of thing, those sort of decisions where a unit of people is making a decision that's going to affect another separate, different unit, that was men's stuff. But the inward decisions were generally taken by women, including really important, the hiring and firing of servants and so forth. That's really important. That influences other people's destinies, their lives, very, very directly. How we bring up children. And women knew what was going on. If you're, imagine a man has 8 children, 4 sons, 4 daughters, and they all get married. The 4 sons would generally stay with the household, with the oikos, stay where they were. And the daughters would go out to those various other families that they'd just married into. Now, yes, granted, it wasn't always done that way. There are societies where it's the men who change family, but by and large, in the past, women, when they married, changed family, and guys stay where they were. So, there's an ancient Greek word, ainata. Would you believe it? In Homer's time, there was no word for wife. I know, extraordinary, isn't it? You would think that's a word you would really need. But no, the best he could do was my wedded bedmate. But he did have this word, ainata. And ainata is your husband's brother's wife. Okay, so in this household, which has these 4 brothers in it, they have 4 wives. These are from different families. And this wife here has 3 ainatas, the wives of their husband's brothers. Got it? If these ainatas got it together, and it seemed very often they did, they could be tremendously powerful because these were the women running their household. So if these ainatas formed a coalition, it would be almost unbreakable. They knew what their husbands had been doing and saying recently, and they all had quite a bit of influence, I'm sure, over their husbands, and they would have had influence over their children, and they would probably have a lot of influence over the servants and slaves in the household as well. They're ruling the roost. Within the oikos, it would be the women who had the purse strings in their hands, for instance. They would decide what we're going to spend money on. They're going to decide what we're going to eat tomorrow, what we can afford to eat tomorrow. And if you wanted to give away a gift, as Priam did to Achilles, then they would decide what they could afford to do without and give away. The inward power within tribes and nations and households particularly was in the hands of women. And it was the outward-looking stuff which required ambassadors and soldiers and voyagers to go out and deal with other groups of people that was in the hands of men. So there are two kinds of power in the world, and the one that gets written down in history is the outward-looking power. How did this nation behave to that nation? Oh, that's interesting. Let's write it all down. What did the ambassador say? Oh, was there a war? But the inward-looking stuff, which actually influenced most people most of the time, which didn't get written down, that was in the hands of women. So actually, in terms of what genes got passed on in the world, probably more influenced by women than men, because they would have had a lot of influence over arranged marriages, I'm sure, and that is of the non-romantic kind, but also of the romantic kind of marriage. Oh, so-and-so fancies so-and-so. I think that's a good match. Matchmaking was a woman's art, not a man's. And throwing obstacles in the way of romances or encouraging romances and so forth. I'm sure that was far more something that women did than men. So that would have a profound influence on what genes got passed on. So yes, I'm painting with very broad brush here, and there are loads of exceptions. But as a generality, I would say that is true of most of the past.